What happens when one of Hollywood's most unpredictable actors sits across from one of daytime TV's most no-nonsense hosts? You're about to see a celebrity interview so intense, so off the rails, it's become the stuff of entertainment legend. This wasn't just another promotional pit stop for Nicolas Cage. It turned into a full-on verbal wrestling match with Whoopi Goldberg, and neither of them held back. Now, don't anticipate a run-of-the-mill discussion of future films and professional milestones. No, this interview became a crash course on how one strong personality can utterly turn the script around, and not for the better. Before we get to this jaw-dropping moment, go ahead and hit subscribe. And hey, leave us a comment. What's the most awkward celebrity interview you've ever witnessed? Because in all honesty, this one might take the cake. The drama started when Nicolas Cage stepped onto the set of The View. He was ready to discuss his new movie, likely anticipating the usual tame questions and some chuckles. Instead, however, he faced off against Whoopi Goldberg, who obviously arrived armed with an entirely different sort of agenda. "Welcome to The View, Nicholas," Whoopi announced, her voice already tinged with just enough acidity to make the other co-hosts squirm uncomfortably in their chairs. "I have to ask you something that's been on my mind for years. Your acting choices, they're pretty wild, aren't they?" Cage appeared startled for a second, but he remained composed. "Well, Whoopi," he said, "I feel that if you're going to be an actor, then you should take risks. I don't want to play it safe, because to me, that's not what art is about." "Art?" Whoopi interrupted, a raised eyebrow of skepticism. "That what we're using now? Because I've seen some of your newer work, and let's just say I didn't leave feeling like I'd just watched a work of art." The studio fell silent suddenly. No laughter, no applause, only a heavy, uncomfortable silence. The camera crew even picked up on it, zooming in close on their faces to catch every flicker of tension. "I apologize," Cage replied, his tone firm, but his face growing hard. "What are you getting at?" "I'm saying, Whoopi leaned forward slightly. "Maybe you've been phoning it in these past few years. Face Off, Con Air, those were movies. But this recent stuff feels like you're just cashing a check." At that point, the co-hosts, Joy Behar and Sarah Haynes, glanced at each other nervously, as if silently wondering how far this would go. This was going to be a simple promotional interview with Nicolas Cage for his new thriller, not a public demolition of his entire career. "Whoopi, I think there's some sort of misunderstanding here," Cage replied, his hands beginning to gesture more vigorously. "Each character I play, I commit to giving it everything I have. I don't just show up and cash a check." "Really?" Whoopi replied, her tone thick with doubt. "Because that's not what I've heard from some folks in the business. Word is, you'll take any part that pays enough to help cover your debts." That stung. The remark hung in the air like wisps of smoke after a firecracker had exploded. Cage actually seemed shaken for a moment. You could almost see it in his face, the flush creeping up to his cheeks, the flash of incredulity in his eyes. And the cameras didn't blink, catching every moment of his attempt to maintain professionalism in the midst of such a personal and direct attack. "That's really unprofessional," Cage finally spat, his tone tight and deliberately controlled. "I came here thinking we'd be discussing my movie, and now I'm being ambushed with tabloid rumor." "I'm only asking reasonable questions," Whoopi said, utterly unperturbed by his outburst. "Your financial woes are well on the record. You've yourself admitted to taking on roles you wouldn't have otherwise touched." "Playing roles to pay bills doesn't mean I didn't give everything I had to those performances," Cage snapped back, that characteristic fire beginning to burn in his voice. "Every actor in this town has had to make some practical decisions." "Maybe that's right," Whoopi replied, refusing to let up a step. "But making sensible decisions hurts the product in the end, can't it? When you're phoning it in just to get paid, the audience senses that. They know." By then, the atmosphere on set had changed. It wasn't tense, it was uncomfortable. You could practically hear the co-hosts catching their breath. At last, Joy Behar made an attempt to diffuse the situation. "Maybe we could change things up a bit and discuss the new film," she said, attempting a smile. "It really does look exciting." But Whoopi was not going to let up. No, she interrupted Joy in mid-sentence. Let's just stay right here. I think Nicholas can stand a little honest talk about his career, unless I'm mistaken. That dare hung in the air like a challenge. Cage's jaw locked, the muscles nodding visibly. I can do honest conversation. Whoopi, he said slowly. What I can't stand is disrespect masquerading as journalism. Disrespect? Whoopi delivered a quick, hard laugh, but there was not a shred of humor in it. I'm just telling the truth. You used to take risks. You used to choose bold, interesting projects. Now you're making films that bypass theaters altogether and end up on streaming sites nobody's ever heard of. Those were harsh words, but Cage didn't blink. Those platforms, he replied, his voice louder now, give filmmakers creative freedom that big studios often don't. Just because something doesn't have a $200 million budget doesn't mean it's not real art. Artistic merit? Whoopi raised an eyebrow as if daring him to keep defending himself. Whoopi's tone took a sharper turn, laced now with a hint of condescension. Is that what you refer to as those action films? She said. The kind where you essentially play the same dude repeatedly? The gruff lone wolf with a shady history and some damsel in distress to rescue? By now, everyone in the studio knew that this wasn't merely a difficult interview. This was a personal thing. What could have begun as criticism had grown into something far more sharp-tongued. It seemed more like an ambush than an honest exchange. And as for Nicolas Cage, he really didn't have much to fight back against in this type of environment. I bring something unique to each role, Cage insisted, his hands a blur now, each word emphasized with the same kind of fervor a veteran actor would use. Whether I'm doing an intimate little indie or a large-scale movie, I treat each character with the same seriousness and attention. Commitment? Whoopi replied with a smirk. Or is it just desperation? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you'll take any script that crosses your desk, no matter how bad it is. The crowd visibly became agitated. They started looking at each other. Some mumbled, some just shifted in their seats, obviously ill at ease with how far this had escalated. This wasn't why they came. This wasn't a celebrity Q&A anymore. It was a public dismantling. Listen, Whoopi, Cage interjected abruptly, his voice lowering to a gravelly, measured tone that announced his tolerance was wearing thin. I didn't come here to discuss my work, to get lectured by someone who obviously arrived with an agenda. My agenda is the truth, Whoopi said icily, crossing her arms over her chest, something that's not in very much supply in Hollywood anymore. No, Cage snapped, and this time there was a break in the smooth cool he had been keeping. Your game is humiliation. You're using your forum to shoot at me, and I really have no idea why. Humiliation? Whoopi echoed in mock astonishment, her voice climbing. I'm simply inquiring about your career, Nicholas. If you can't stand that, perhaps you shouldn't do interviews. The co-hosts, obviously wanting to be somewhere else, remained uncomfortably silent. Sarah Haynes shuffled the cue cards in her lap without glancing up. Joy Behar opened her mouth as if she were going to jump in, but then declined and remained silent. The atmosphere was suffocating. There's a huge difference between questioning my career and questioning my character, Cage replied, sitting up now more ramrod straight, voice stronger. You're not merely criticizing performances. I can handle that. You're questioning my integrity as a performer. And quite frankly, I don't believe you are in any position to make that call. Not qualified? Whoopi's eyes flashed. I've been in this game longer than you, Nicholas. I've watched what occurs when actors compromise for a check. And let me tell you, you're not some special exception. I never made such a claim, Cage shot back, now more engaged. But I'm not going to sit here and have you dismantle decades of my work based on subjective opinions masquerading as harsh realities. Personal opinions? Whoopi laughed coldly. Box office receipts don't lie. Critics don't lie. The record's out there for everyone to look at. Cage shifted forward, each sentence now infused with conviction. My last few years of work consist of films that had dedicated audiences worldwide. Just because they don't measure up to your definition of success doesn't mean they're not important. Value? Whoopi repeated with disdain, stretching the word out as if it was one she didn't quite hold in high regard. What value is there, Whoopi continued, her tone becoming increasingly tart, in repeating the same cookie-cutter action film ad infinitum. Where is the Nicolas Cage who introduced us to Leaving Las Vegas? Where is the actor who once pushed himself? That stung. Naming his Oscar-winning character definitely hit a nerve. Cage's jaw clenched, and for an instant, that infamous intensity, hard and pure, came to the fore. That actor is still standing, he said softly, but each word was loaded. He stood there in every performance, even in the movies people like you discard without even seeing. Oh, I've seen them, Whoopi said, with a self-satisfied little grin. And really, it hurts to see someone as talented as you doing. Mediocrity. Mediocrity, Cage repeated, his voice snagging ever so slightly. You really believe I'm settling for mediocrity? That I wake up every morning and decide to give anything less than everything I've got? There was a heaviness in the room now. The emotion in Cage's voice wasn't for show. It was real. Even some crew members behind the cameras shifted awkwardly, glancing around as the conversation veered further away from anything resembling professional critique. I think you've gotten comfortable, Whoopi continued, apparently fueled by Cage's reaction. I think you've forgotten what it means to really push yourself. Don't know what you're even talking about, Cage spat back, hands shaking a little now, his feelings barely contained. Each and every role I accept, I immerse myself. I research. I do the work. I give it everything I've got. For a straight-to-streaming action movie, Whoopi cut in, her disbelief impossible to ignore. Come on, Nicholas. How much preparation does it actually take to be angry guy with a gun? That was it. You could see it on his face. Disbelief, frustration, and a hurt, wounded pride. His face went through pain, then anger, and ended up in a sort of stunned silence. That, Cage said slowly, voice rising with new strength, is exactly the kind of small-minded comment I'd expect from someone who judges art by its box office or marketing budget. Just because a film doesn't get a theatrical release doesn't mean it's worthless. I think when you're phoning it in, it shows, Whoopi fired back, not missing a beat. And lately, that's exactly what I've been seeing from you. Phoning it in? Cage leaned forward, his posture suddenly taller, more confident. You want to see phoning it in? Watch network TV sometime. Look at the performances of actors phoning it in, just showing up, reciting lines, drawing a paycheck. The conversation had changed now. Are you telling me I phone it in? Whoopi's voice dropped low, quiet but hot. I'm saying, Cage responded, holding her gaze, you're throwing stones from a glass house. Cage held her gaze, not backing down for a second. You want to talk about artistic integrity, he said. Let's talk about using your platform to ambush your guests instead of having a real respectful conversation. You might have heard a pin drop inside the studio. Even the cameras, which normally floated softly to get angles, stopped moving. This had moved way beyond tense. It had entered new territory. Ambush? Whoopi's tone became chilly. I'm asking you about your professional life. If that's too great a challenge for you, perhaps you should confine yourself to those low-key movies where people don't expect you to respond to actual questions. Real questions? Cage shot back, his voice rising again. These aren't questions, Whoopi. These are calculated jabs. You're not acting like a journalist. You're acting like a bully with a microphone. That word, bully, hung in the air like a clap of thunder. Joy Behar, realizing how far things had devolved, attempted to say what she could. Perhaps we can take a short break, she suggested softly, almost optimistically. But neither Cage nor Whoopi listened to her, or if they did, neither was interested in stopping the firestorm. A bully? Whoopi said, loaded with sarcasm. Because I'm requesting that you justify your actions? Because I am refusing to genuflect and throw gentle balls like all the other interviewers? You're not inquiring, Cage said brusquely. You're accusing. There's a difference between journalism and a hit piece. You went over the line. Character assassination? Whoopi laughed, but it was a nasty sound. Your character brought you here, Nicholas. Nobody made you make those decisions. What job? Cage replied, his hands gesturing fervently as anger reached the boiling point. The job of being a working actor? of remaining devoted to the art when everyone else gives up, of making daring choices rather than playing it safe? No, Whoopi replied starkly. The role of a once great actor who's now a punchline. That stung. You could see it in the face of Cage as the words registered. Shock, pain, and then that chilly, old, familiar flame, the sort anyone who's watched his career would know. A punchline, he said again quietly, his voice little more than a whisper. And yet, for all that, it hit harder than if he'd bellowed it. That's what you've become, Whoopi continued, seemingly unaware or uncaring of the storm she was stirring. People don't watch your movies for your acting anymore. They watch to see what bizarre thing you'll do next. Weird thing? Cage repeated, his voice still low, but his body language said everything. His shoulders were stiff, his fists clenched just slightly. He was holding back a tidal wave. You're considering my attempt to bring truth to all roles I perform strange? He asked, eyes fixed on hers. My considering your tendency to overact in all roles strange? Whoopi fired back. And I think you know why it is. That's why you're being so defensive. And now there was no question. This wasn't a professional argument anymore. It had taken a very personal turn. The jabs weren't just movie jabs anymore. They were jabs at Nicolas Cage, the individual. Nicolas Cage, the artist. A man who had invested decades of his life into his work. Defensive? Cage finally replied, his voice escalating once more. The storm only just beginning to blow. I'm not being defensive, Whoopi, Cage replied, staring her down. I'm being honest about what's really going on here. Oh yeah? She taunted, leaning forward slightly. And what do you think is going on? I see someone using their platform to tear down a guest. Not to inform, not to inspire, but just to entertain at their expense. Cage said, his voice growing more forceful with each word. I see someone who's forgotten how to have a respectful conversation. Respectful? Whoopi's eyebrows shot up. You want respect? Then earn it. Make movies that deserve it. That was a hard line to land. It wasn't merely blunt, it was cruel. The sort of remark so cutting and offhanded that even the other co-hosts visibly flinched. Cage glared at her for what felt like an eternity. His chest heaved slowly as he struggled to calm his breathing. When he spoke once more, his voice had slipped into a creepy calm, the sort that immediately stilled the whole room. Know what, Whoopi? He replied. I've been in this business for more than 30 years, and I have never encountered anyone so bent on being cruel for the sake of it. Cruel? Whoopi repeated, still belligerent. I'm just telling the truth. If you can't deal with truth, perhaps it's time to reconsider your line of work. Honest? Cage slowly stood up from his chair, standing tall now, his commanding presence filling the room. There is nothing honest going on here. This is not journalism, and it is not good TV. It is mean. At the other end of the table, Joy Behar and Sarah Haynes appeared to be witnessing a slow-motion automobile accident. Sarah had ceased to pretend to scan her notes, while Joy was looking at Whoopi as though she hardly knew her. Mean, Whoopi replied, laughing a little nervously, but something in her voice had changed. The swagger that supported her earlier jibes had begun to falter. I'm inquiring as to your line of work, Nicholas. If you can't discuss it without breaking down, perhaps that tells you something. It says I care, Cage responded, his voice building strength. It says I give my heart to every single performance, even the ones people such as yourself judge before they've even watched a frame. Heart? Whoopi asked, the sneering tone still present but more muted now. Yes, heart, Cage uttered, voice cracking just a little bit. Do you know what it's like to give your life to something, only to have it ripped asunder by people who don't even bother trying to comprehend what you're doing? His openness sliced through the studio like a blade. You could sense it. Even the crew of the camera were stunned, silently aware they were catching something special. Unfiltered, human, and pretty raw. Right, I get it, Whoopi eventually said, but the combat had softened her tone. I get that you were a great actor once, and now you aren't. Used to be, Cage quietly echoed. His hands were trembling now, not out of rage, but out of everything else seething beneath. Still that actor, Whoopi, he said. I still give everything I have to every performance. The only thing different now is that people like you shoot down my work before it's even had a chance. There was a moment of silence. Then, to his surprise, Whoopi's tone softened. Your passion isn't phony, she said. But your choices. She left the sentence unfinished. My choices, Cage parroted, his tone barely above a yell once more, this time with the full fury of that mythic Cage ferocity. My choices are to continue working, to continue creating, to continue expanding the parameters, even when critics prejudge in advance that my work is not worth worrying about. Exactly how is that questionable? Because you're better than the material you've been choosing, Whoopi replied, and for the first time her tone suggested she might be trying to soften the blow, even just a little. Better than the material, Cage said, clearly stunned. You haven't even seen most of the films I'm talking about. You're judging them based on their marketing budgets and their trailers. You're dismissing the hard work of dozens, sometimes hundreds of people because those films don't match your narrow definition of what matters. I'm judging them based on quality, Whoopi insisted, though her voice didn't carry the same confidence it had earlier. Quality? Cage replied, dropping his tone, but that just made his words land more harshly. Let's discuss the quality of this interview, Whoopi. The quality of having a guest come on your show in good faith, only to ambush, to take away their work, their passion, and their dignity under the guise of asking questions. And for the first time, Whoopi stalled. The other co-hosts had practically vanished into their seats by now. Joy Behar and Sarah Haynes both staring downward, clearly wishing they could melt into the floor. I'm not ambushing anyone, Whoopi said after a pause, but her tone was more defensive than firm. I'm asking legitimate questions about your career trajectory. Legitimate questions, Cage asked, his voice rising again, feelings churning just under the surface. You said I was a punchline, Whoopi. You said I was phoning it in. You called my integrity into question. Not my roles, not my filmography, me as an artist. That's not journalism. Those aren't questions. They're attacks. They're observations, Whoopi said, but her words were drained now. Those are insults, Cage retorted, and the worst part is they're ignorant insults. You're berating work you haven't even bothered to sit through or comprehend. I comprehend enough, Whoopi muttered, attempting to sound assertive. No, you don't, Cage replied sternly, his tone now dripping with frustration and something more, disappointment. You know box office figures. You know Rotten Tomatoes ratings. What you don't know is the craft. You don't know what it's like to lose yourself in a character, whether the budget of the film is $2 million or $200 million. I know that you used to choose better scripts, Whoopi ventured, attempting to wrestle back the moment. Used to? Cage's voice cracked just slightly. I'm still choosing roles that challenge me. The only difference now is I'm working with visionary filmmakers who may not have major studio support, but who have heart, imagination, and a love for storytelling. Passion doesn't always make for good movies, Whoopi said, but now her tone was quieter than before. And studio support doesn't necessarily translate into good films either, Cage retorted. But you only want to own up to part of that reality. Whoopi said nothing. Her silence lapsed, long and awkward. Even the crowd, once abuzz, was utterly motionless. Everyone in that room knew that they were watching something extraordinary and true. Look, Baij at last replied, his tone more controlled, though no less compelling. I ended up here to discuss my work, to give your audience some sense of the passion for storytelling that I feel. Instead, I've been here for more than 20 minutes while you dismantled my character like I wasn't even present in this room. That's not character assassination, Whoopi said feebly, but sounded more like a tick than an actual defense. Exactly that, Cage answered, his tone even but unshakable. And the worst of it? You did it in disguise as journalism. You used your position to bring down someone who didn't have the authority to strike back in the way you do. You seem to be striking back pretty well, Whoopi said, trying for a weak smile. I'm not fighting back, Cage said with quiet resolve. I'm defending my life's work. There's a difference between standing up for yourself and letting someone bully you. The word bully seemed to land hard. For the first time during the entire segment, Whoopi Goldberg looked genuinely shaken by where the conversation had gone. "I wasn't bullying anyone," she said softly. "Guilty as charged, yes," Cage answered with no hesitation. "You used your platform, your position, upon which to bully someone who arrived here in good faith. That's bullying." They weren't screamed, they weren't over the top, but the passion behind them made them impossible to ignore. Even the co-hosts, who had kept quiet for the most part throughout the exchange, now subtly nodded, agreeing with his judgment, if silently. "I think we need to move on," Joy Behar interrupted, her voice taut, eager to save what was left of the interview. "No," Cage firmly instructed, his eyes focused intently on Whoopi. "I think we have to recognize what just transpired here, because a line was crossed." "What line?" Whoopi's voice was almost a whisper now. "The line between professional critique and personal assault," Cage answered. "Between honest discussion and humiliation masquerading as honesty." The words hung suspended in the air like a silent thunderstorm, unignorable. Whoopi glared at him, obviously searching for something to say. But the fire in her voice was extinguished. "I was just being truthful about what I see," she whispered finally. "No," Cage said, rising slowly and starting to take off his mic. "You were cruel, and I won't sit here and be complicit in that." "Where are you going?" Whoopi demanded, a hint of fear entering her voice. "I'm walking out," Cage said quietly, carefully unwinding the mic from his jacket. "I did not come here to discuss my work, only to be a verbal punching bag." "You can't just get up and leave," she stated, her tone increasing. "I can," he said quietly, "and I am." Suddenly, the studio was a blur. Producers came scurrying in, attempting to persuade Cage to remain. But it was evident he'd already made up his mind. He turned over the mic to one of the producers and looked to Whoopi for the final time. "You had an opportunity," he spoke softly, "a genuine opportunity to have a meaningful exchange about art, about passion, about what it's like to commit yourself to something for decades. But instead, you opted for cruelty, for entertainment." He stopped. "That tells you everything about you, and nothing about me." And with that, Nicolas Cage stormed off the view stage, leaving the stunned studio, a quiet panel of co-hosts, and a host who, maybe for the first time in her career, was speechless. The cameras rolled on, capturing Whoopi, frozen in her chair, looking at the vacant seat in front of her, the same seat that only seconds before had been occupied by one of Hollywood's most sincere and committed actors. You could have heard a pin drop in that studio. The only noise remaining was Cage's footsteps reverberating down the hall. And there you have it, one of the most explosive, emotionally charged interviews ever taped. A moment where Nicolas Cage's passion for his work collided with a wall of cynicism, and he emerged with his dignity intact. What was your reaction to Cage's reply? Did he react appropriately, or should he have remained and completed the interview? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettably embarrassing celebrity moments you won't find anywhere else. Also, tell us, what's the most unprofessional interview moment you've ever seen?